My name is Brooke Langley, I am 27 years old. You know that quiet, heavy moment when everything you thought was solid just shifts under your feet, and you realize the people who were supposed to protect your peace were the ones rewriting it without you? That is where my story starts. If you have ever sat with that same hollow feeling in your chest, wondering how much you missed while trying to keep everything calm, I hope you will stay with me through this. I lived in a quiet house on one of those tree-lined streets in Carmel, Indiana, the kind of place where the lawns stay neat and the neighbors wave without asking too many questions. My husband and I had built what looked like a steady life there. I worked in a mid-level marketing role at a local firm, the sort of job that let me keep regular hours and still feel like I was building something of my own. He worked in sales, always talking about the next big account, always promising that things would get easier once a few more deals closed. My best friend had been in my life since college, the person I called when the days felt long, the one who knew every quiet fear I carried. Looking back, the first cracks were small enough that I told myself they were nothing. He would come home later than planned and offer soft excuses about client dinners. She would cancel our coffee dates with a quick text about work stress. I stayed calm because that was who I was. I believed if I kept the peace and showed up with patience, the rest would settle. The day everything began to surface started like any other ordinary Tuesday. I had stayed late at the office finishing a presentation, the kind of quiet overtime that never felt like a burden until the rumors started circling. A coworker named Dana Whitfield stopped by my desk that afternoon with a look I could not quite read. She mentioned, carefully, that a few people in the break room had been talking about me and my husband. Something about money that was supposed to come our way, something about how I must be holding everything together for a reason that had nothing to do with love. I thanked her and kept my voice even, but the words sat heavy in my chest the whole drive home. When I walked through the door that evening, the house felt too still. My husband was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He looked up and smiled the way he always did when he wanted the conversation to stay light. I set my bag down and told him, calmly, what Dana had said. I did not accuse. I simply asked if there was anything I needed to know about money or plans that involved us. He closed the laptop and leaned back. His voice stayed soft, almost gentle. You know, your parents have always talked about taking care of us eventually. That inheritance they mentioned years ago, the one that was supposed to help us once things settled. I have been trying to make sure we stay in a good place for when that happens. You do not need to worry about office gossip. People talk when they do not understand. I remember the way the air changed in that moment. The promise of that inheritance had been floating around for a long time, always vague, always just out of reach, always tied to the idea that if I stayed patient and kept the marriage steady, everything would work out. I had never pressed for details because pressing felt like distrust, and distrust was the one thing I tried not to carry. That night I sat on the edge of the bed after he fell asleep and let the quiet fill the room. My phone lit up with a message from my best friend. She asked if I was okay, said she had heard something at work too, and offered to come over the next day. I typed back that I was fine, the same answer I always gave when I needed a little more time to think. The next morning the rumors had already moved further. Another person in the hallway asked, almost casually, if it was true that I was only staying in the marriage because of some family money that was coming. I answered with a calm shake of my head and kept walking, but the words followed me into every meeting. By lunch I felt the weight of being watched, the sense that the story about me was growing without my permission. I called my best friend during my break. Her voice sounded warm. The way it always did. She told me not to listen to the office talk, that people invented things when they were bored. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that my husband had mentioned the inheritance once or twice when the two of them talked, just in passing, nothing serious. I stayed quiet for a moment and then asked her, gently, how often those conversations happened. She laughed lightly and said it was nothing, just the kind of talk friends have when they care about each other. That evening I came home to find my husband already on a call. He stepped outside when he saw me, the door closing softly behind him. When he came back and he looked tired, the same tired he always claimed after a long day of sales. I asked, still keeping my voice even, if the inheritance talk was something he and my best friend had discussed more than once. He set his phone down and met my eyes. "You are making this into more than it is. Your mother has always said the family would take care of us when the time was right. I have only been trying to keep things stable so that when that happens, we are ready. Sierra has been a good friend to both of us. You know that." The way he said her name sat differently in the room. I nodded, because nodding was the only way I knew how to keep the moment from breaking open too fast. Later, after he went upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened the cloud storage we shared for household documents. I was not searching for anything specific. I only wanted to see if there were papers about the inheritance that might explain the rumors. What I found instead was a short video file dated a few weeks earlier. It was labeled with a string of numbers, nothing that suggested it belonged there. I almost closed the folder. Something quiet and stubborn made me click it open. The footage was grainy, taken from a low angle in what looked like the living room of a place I did not recognize. My husband sat on a couch. My best friend sat beside him. Their voices were low but clear enough. He spoke about the inheritance promise the way someone speaks about a tool, not a gift. He said my mother had already agreed to keep the details quiet so I would not ask questions. She nodded and placed her hand on his arm the way a person does when they already know the plan. I watched the short clip twice. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator. The next day at work the rumors had teeth. Dana stopped by again, this time with a printout of an email that had been forwarded around the office. It was vague, carefully worded, but it painted a picture of a woman who stayed in a marriage for money that was not even hers yet. I thanked her for showing me and walked to the restroom so no one would see the way my hands shook. That evening I asked my husband, once more, to sit with me at the table. I did not raise my voice. I simply told him I had seen the footage. I described what was on it without adding anything extra. He stared at me for a long moment. Then the softness left his face. "You went through our files without asking. That is the real problem here. Everything I have done has been to protect the life we are building. Your mother understands that. Sierra understands that. You are the only one turning it into something ugly." I kept my hands folded in my lap and asked the only question that still mattered. "Did my mother know about the two of you?" He looked away. The silence that followed was answer enough. I stood up slowly, walked to the bedroom, and packed a small bag with the clothes I would need for a few days. He followed me, still talking, still explaining, still insisting that the inheritance was real and that the rest was just noise I had allowed other people to invent. I did not argue. I only told him I needed space to think. When I reached the door he said, quiet and final, "If you walk out now, you walk out of everything. The family support, the plans we made, all of it. Your mother will not stand with you on this. You know that." I paused with my hand on the handle. The weight of those words settled into the same place. The rumors had lived all day. Then I opened the door and stepped into the cool Indiana evening, the tree-lined street quiet around me, the bag light on my shoulder, and the first real quiet of the night settling into my chest. I drove for a while with no clear destination, the bag still on the passenger seat, the quiet of the car holding everything I had not yet said out loud. Eventually I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town, the kind of place that asked no questions after dark. I set the bag on the chair by the window and sat on the edge of the bed, the same calm that had carried me through the evening still wrapped around me even though my hands would not quite stay still. The phone lit up almost immediately. My husband had already left 3 messages. The first one sounded careful. The second one carried the edge of warning. The third one simply said that walking out the way I had done would cost more than I understood. I did not answer. The next morning the workplace rumors had moved past quiet hallway talk. When I walked into the office, two people stopped speaking the moment they saw me. Dana Whitfield met me near the coffee station and spoke in a low voice. She said the email from the day before had been forwarded again, this time with an added note suggesting that the only reason I stayed in the marriage was the promise of money that had never been mine to begin with. I thanked her for the warning and went to my desk, the same steady posture I always used when the ground felt uncertain. Around mid-morning my phone buzzed with a message from my best friend. She asked if we could talk, said she had heard I left the house, and claimed she only wanted to help. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back that I needed a little more time. Her reply came quickly. She said the inheritance conversation had never been anything more than a shared hope between people who cared about the same future, and that I was turning a quiet family matter into something public and ugly. The words sat in my chest the same way the video footage had the night before. That afternoon I stepped outside during lunch and called my sister-in-law. Nora Langley had always been careful with her words, the kind of person who watched more than she spoke. I told her, without raising my voice, that I had seen footage of my husband and my best friend discussing the inheritance in a way that felt planned. There was a short silence on the other end of the line. Then she said she had something I needed to see, papers she had found weeks earlier while helping sort old files at the house, papers she had not known what to do with until now. We met in the parking lot of a grocery store a few miles from the office. She handed me a thin folder without ceremony. Inside were printed emails and a short handwritten note. The emails were between my husband and my best friend, dated months earlier. They spoke about keeping the inheritance story alive so I would not leave, about how my mother had already agreed to stay quiet if the questions ever started, about the need to make sure I remained the steady one who never asked too much. The handwritten note was in my mother's handwriting. It simply said she understood the arrangement and would not interfere as long as the marriage held. I read every page twice while standing beside my car. My sister-in-law waited without speaking. When I finally looked up, she only said that she had not known how deep it went until she saw the note, and that she could not keep carrying it alone. I thanked her, the same quiet thank you I offered when someone handed me difficult truth, and drove back to the hotel with the folder on the seat beside me. That evening my husband called again. This time I answered. His voice was controlled, almost gentle at first. He said I was overreacting to a conversation that meant nothing, that the inheritance had always been real in the sense that my parents wanted to help us eventually, and that bringing my sister-in-law into it only made everything worse. I told him, still calm, that I had the emails and the note. There was a longer silence this time. Then the softness left his tone completely. You are making a choice right now, he said. If you keep pushing this, the family support you have always counted on will not be there. Your mother already knows the full picture. She chose to stay quiet because she believed it was better for everyone. You walking away does not change what was already decided. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and listened to the rest of what he had to say. He spoke about loyalty, about the life we had built, about how my best friend had only ever tried to help keep things stable. When he finished, I told him I needed the night to think, then ended the call. The room felt larger after the silence returned. The next day at work the rumors had become something sharper. Someone had left a printed copy of the original email on my desk with a handwritten edition that simply asked whether the inheritance was worth the cost. I took the paper to Dana and asked if she knew who might have done it. She shook her head and said the talk had spread past our department, that people were already deciding the story for themselves. I went through the rest of the afternoon with the same steady focus I always used, answering emails and finishing the presentation that had once felt ordinary. Late that afternoon my best friend appeared in the parking lot as I was leaving. She stood beside my car with her arms folded, the same familiar posture that used to feel like safety. She said she had only ever wanted what was best for both of us, that the conversations with my husband had never crossed a line she considered real, and that the inheritance talk was simply a way to keep the future from feeling so uncertain. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her, quietly, whether she had known about the note my mother had written. Her face changed. For a moment she looked like someone who had not expected the question. Then she said that my mother had always understood the larger picture, that some things were better left unsaid if it meant the marriage stayed intact. The words landed with the same weight as the video footage. I thanked her for the honesty and drove away while she was still standing there. Back at the hotel, I opened the folder again and read the note in my mother's handwriting one more time. The careful loops of the letters felt familiar and strange at the same time. I thought about every quiet conversation we had shared over the years, every time she had told me to be patient, every time she had said that marriages required sacrifice that other people would never see. The pieces settled into place with a slow, irreversible clarity. My phone lit up once more. This time it was a message from my father. He said he had spoken with my husband and with my mother, that the family was concerned about the public nature of what I was doing, and that walking away from the marriage would mean walking away from the support that had always been there. The message ended with a simple statement that some choices could not be undone. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and sat in the quiet room for a long time. The folder stayed open on the bed. The bag I had packed 2 nights earlier still rested on the chair. Outside the window, the tree-lined streets of Carmel continued their ordinary evening rhythm, unaware of the way the ground had shifted under the life I thought I knew. I did not sleep much that night. When the first light came through the curtains, I already knew the next conversation I needed to have would not be easy, and that whatever answer waited on the other side of it would leave something behind that could not be recovered. I drove to the house that morning with the folder on the seat beside me, the same quiet determination that had carried me through the last 2 days still steady in my chest. My husband was already in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked up from the table as if he had been waiting. I set the folder down between us and opened it to the note in my mother's handwriting. I did not raise my voice. I simply asked him to look at it and tell me, once and for all, how long the arrangement had been in place. He read the page without speaking. When he finally met my eyes, the careful softness he usually wore was gone. "Your mother understood what was necessary," he said. "She knew the marriage needed something solid to hold it together, and the inheritance story gave us that. Sierra and I never meant for you to find the details this way. We were trying to protect the life we all shared." I stayed standing. "You used a promise that was never real to keep me from leaving. You let the office rumors grow while you both sat with the truth. And my mother knew every part of it." He stood as well. The distance between us felt larger than the kitchen. "You are choosing to destroy everything over a few conversations and a note. If you walk away now, the family support you have always had will not follow you. Your mother already made her position clear. Your father supports her. Nora should never have given you those papers." I asked him to call my best friend. He hesitated, then did. When she arrived 20 minutes later, the 3 of us stood in the same kitchen where so many ordinary evenings had once felt safe. I placed the printed emails and the handwritten note on the table and asked her the only question that still mattered. "Did you know my mother had written that she would stay quiet as long as the marriage held?" My best friend looked at the note for a long time. Then she nodded once. "She said it was better for everyone if you did not have to carry the full weight of it. We believed we were keeping the future steady." The words settled into the room with a finality that needed no further explanation. I gathered the papers, closed the folder, and told them both that I would not be returning to the house as his wife. The decision felt quiet rather than dramatic, the kind of choice that arrives after the last illusion has already fallen away. My husband followed me to the door. His voice stayed low, but the warning in it was clear. "You are cutting yourself off from more than this marriage. The family will not stand with you after this. You know that." I did not answer. I simply walked to the car with the folder under my arm and drove away while the morning light still felt new. Later that same day, I returned to the office and filed a formal complaint about the rumors that had been spreading through the department. I attached the printed email that had been left on my desk and asked for a record of how the story had moved from private talk to public speculation. Dana Whitfield walked with me to the Human Resources office and waited while I completed the form. The process itself was ordinary, almost bureaucratic, yet it carried the weight of drawing a line I had never drawn before. That evening I called my mother. Her voice was calm when she answered, the same steady tone I had known my entire life. I told her I had the note, the emails, and the footage. I asked her, without accusation, why she had chosen to stay silent while the arrangement continued. There was a long pause. Then she said, I believed it would keep the marriage intact. I believed you would be safer that way. I did not expect the truth to surface the way it did. I listened to the rest of what she offered. When she finished, I told her, quietly, that the support I had always counted on from her and from my father could no longer come with conditions that required me to remain in a marriage built on a false promise. The silence that followed was the heaviest I had ever shared with her. In the days that came after, the consequences arrived in small, irreversible pieces. My father sent a short message stating that the family would need time and distance. My sister-in-law called once to say she was sorry the papers had caused so much fracture, then the calls stopped. The workplace investigation into the rumors produced a quiet internal note that the speculation had been inappropriate, but the damage to the way people looked at me had already settled into place. I stayed in the hotel for another week while I found a small apartment on the other side of Carmel, nothing elaborate, just a place with enough quiet to let the next chapter begin. The divorce papers were filed without ceremony. My husband did not contest the terms. The inheritance story, the one that had never been real, simply dissolved into the same silence that now surrounded the rest of the family connections. There were nights when the quiet felt heavier than I expected. I would sit with a cup of tea and remember the version of my life that had once felt steady, the version in which my husband, my best friend, and my mother had all seemed to stand on the same side of the truth. Those memories did not disappear. They simply took their place among the things I could no longer carry. I returned to work with the same calm focus I had always used. The rumors faded eventually, the way most office talk does once the next story arrives. Dana remained a steady presence in the hallway conversations, never asking for more than I was ready to give. The formal complaint I had filed stayed on record as a quiet marker that I had chosen to protect what was left of my name. Months later, the house on the tree-lined street was sold. I did not attend the closing. The proceeds were divided according to the papers we signed, and the last practical ties between us ended with a single transfer of funds written out in full. I used my portion to settle into the new apartment and to begin the slow work of building a life that no longer required anyone else's version of the future. There is no dramatic victory in the way this ended. The family support I had known for 27 years simply stepped back and did not return. My mother and I exchange brief messages on birthdays and holidays, the kind of careful language that keeps the distance intact. My father has not called. My best friend moved to another city, and the silence between us remains unbroken. What remains is quieter than I once imagined peace would feel. I wake each morning in a space that belongs only to me. I go to work without the weight of a story other people were writing on my behalf. I have learned that the boundaries I set after the truth surfaced did not restore what was lost, but they did protect the one thing that could still be protected. Boundaries protect your peace. That is the only lesson that settled into place after everything else fell away. Choosing myself cost the family support I had always believed would stay. It cost the version of love that had been built on a promise that was never real. It left a lingering tension that still visits on quiet evenings when the old memories rise. Yet it also left me standing in a life that no longer requires me to carry someone else's version of the truth. Thank you for listening to my story. If you were standing where I stood, with the folder of proof in your hands and the quiet weight of everything that had been kept from you, would you walk away?